Over the last couple months, I challenged myself to start with just $100 and flip gaming PCs all the way up to where I am today, with over $1,000 on hand and some valuable components like an RTX 4060 to test or reuse in the future. As we get ready for the final episode of the challenge, I wanted to take a look back at all the gaming PCs I've sold to reach this point. If you haven't already, I highly recommend watching the previous episodes to see the journey that got us here. In episode 1, where I needed to put something together for $100 or less, I managed to build a solid ultra-budget system after scoring an incredible local deal that kickstarted this challenge. The system featured an i7 4770S paired with an RX 570. In episode 2, with a larger budget, I built a PC featuring a Ryzen 5 2600 and an RX 580. This setup offered solid 1080p gaming at low to medium settings and even had a bit of an upgrade path, which made for an easy, quick, and profitable sale. In episode 3, I put together another solid budget rig featuring an i5 4690K and a GTX 980 Ti. While it was a bit CPU limited in some newer titles, it still performed well as a budget-friendly PC, perfectly meeting the buyer's needs for an esports capable system. The fourth system I built was somewhat of a step back in terms of specs, featuring a Ryzen 3 2300X and the 3GB version of a GTX 1060. This build was more limited and didn't yield much profit. However, the buyer was mainly interested in playing older games, emulation, and esports titles, so overall it worked out well. Episode 5 marked the beginning of some true mid-range budget builds. The PC I put together for this episode featured a Ryzen 7 2700 and an RX 5700. This was the first build in the series with minimal limitations for 1080p gaming, capable of handling even the latest, most demanding titles with some setting optimizations. The most powerful PC in the series so far came in episode 6, where I found a great deal on an RTX 3070 and paired it with the Ryzen 7 3700X and 32GB of RAM. This combination made for a high-performing system that looked awesome and excelled at 1080p ultra settings and was truly 1440p capable as well. In the most recent episode of the challenge, I completed 2 builds. One featured a Ryzen 5 3500X with a GTX 1070 Ti, and the other an i7 7700K paired with a GTX 1070. These 2 gaming PCs helped me offload a lot of the components I'd been accumulating, and after selling them, along with a few other unused parts, I now have $1,222 in cash on hand. For today's final build, I got lucky and recently had a friend commission me to build him a gaming PC. The criteria were pretty straightforward, giving me a clear budget and a solid foundation to work with. The maximum budget for this build is $800. He wants a PC that can handle 1440p gaming on any title and has some future proofing to handle AAA releases in the coming years. He wasn't too particular about the CPU and GPU brand, so I don't have to limit myself to NVIDIA GPUs, which helps a lot. For the components, we agreed to use a mix of new and used parts. While I don't have to stick strictly to current gen components, I'd like to put together something with a reasonable upgrade path to keep it a great rig for years to come. While I considered building the system around the AM5 platform, I ultimately decided to stick with AM4 for this build. Keeping the system under $800 with something like a Ryzen 5 7600X, a B650 motherboard, and a solid 1440p capable GPU is extremely challenging. Since AM4 components are flooding the used market right now, I was able to avoid cutting too many corners by sourcing the core components used. After some thought and market research, I ended up purchasing a used Ryzen 5 5600 for just under $90 on eBay. It's still an incredibly capable hexa-core processor with 12 threads that pairs well with higher-end GPUs without any bottlenecks. To house this CPU, I went with an MSI B550 Gaming Plus ATX motherboard, which I found for just over $79 on eBay. To cool the Ryzen 5, I opted for a sleek Cooler Master Hyper 212 tower cooler that I got new for $21.50 on Amazon. For a PC in this price range with the primary use of 1440p gaming, 32GB of memory is basically mandatory. I luckily found an Oloy Owl kit rated for 3600 MHz on Newegg, which was on sale for $48.52 after tax. For the GPU, I knew I wanted something with more than 8GB of VRAM to future-proof the build, which limited my options quite a bit. However, as I mentioned earlier, not being restricted to NVIDIA RTX cards really opened up more possibilities. With that in mind, I looked for a good deal on a Radeon RX 6700 XT or 6750 XT. Unfortunately, after weeks of searching, I couldn't find a solid local deal on a used card. Since I wanted to put this system together fairly quickly, I settled on a used reference model of the 6700 XT, which I found for $265.74 after tax on eBay. While this is pretty close to market value, it was more important to find a powerful card with plenty of VRAM, and with 12GB of GDDR6, the 6700 XT was a perfect fit. To power the system, I chose a new Corsair CX750, which I found for $66 on Amazon. Going with a new power supply was important for a build in this price range, and with a maximum of 750 watts, it can easily support potential future upgrades. I wasn't too concerned about modular versus non-modular, as the case I selected offers excellent cable management, making it easy to keep things nice and tidy. For storage, I went with a Silicon Power UD90 Gen 4 NVMe SSD with 1TB of space. This provides a good amount of room for the operating system, along with plenty of space for games and programs. If more storage is needed down the line, there's still an available M.2 slot and SATA expansion options. For the case, I chose the new Montech XR Mid Tower. This is the first time I've used this case, and I was pleasantly surprised by what it offers. At just $65 on Amazon, it has a premium look and feel with its fish tank style design and front and side tempered glass panels. It also comes with 3 pre-installed 120mm ARGB fans. As mentioned before, the extra space and the overall layout of the case made cable management a breeze. Speaking of the cables, I added some red and black cable extensions that I had lying around that used to be in my personal rig. I threw these in at no extra cost, but cable extensions like these typically range from around $15 to $25. Lastly, I added a TP-Link TX20E PCIe Wi-Fi adapter since the future owner plans to use Wi-Fi for their internet. I picked it up for just over $20 in like new condition from Amazon. It supports Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2, and installation was quick and easy. Overall, I'm really happy with how the system turned out for just $712. I leaned into the red LED accent on the GPU by adding those cable extensions and setting the RGB lighting on the fans to red. It all came together nicely and gives the build a sleek, cohesive look. For the OS, the buyer requested Windows 10 as that's what they're most familiar with. After installing Windows and the necessary graphics drivers, I also installed a few AAA games that the buyer might play on the system. I tested the games at 1440p, aiming to hit around 60 FPS to ensure smooth performance at fairly high graphics settings. First up, I ran Red Dead Redemption 2 with the graphics slider set to the highest using the Favor Quality preset, which consists of mostly ultra settings. After testing in different environments, the PC achieved around 70 FPS average, with frame rates generally ranging from 60 to 80 throughout. Next, I tested Cyberpunk 2077 using the high graphics preset at native 1440p. After around 10 minutes of exploring Night City, the average frame rate settled at 63 FPS with no major drops and excellent percentile lows. Baldur's Gate 3 at native 1440p with the high preset ran great as well. Performance can vary significantly in different environments, but I was seeing an average around 70 FPS most of the time. I even triggered a massive explosion that would cause my 40 Ti Super to stutter, just to highlight the extreme unrealistic worst case scenario. The last set of tests that I ran was the Black Myth Wukong benchmarking tool. I chose the high settings and enabled frame generation, which helped boost performance to a steady 66 FPS average. Overall, this system represents a great 1440p gaming setup that blends both new and used components without cutting any corners within the budget. While you could potentially build something on AM5 for a similar price, you'd likely be limited to a cheaper, less capable GPU. That said, I believe the buyer will be very satisfied as the PC I built should serve them well for years to come. Upon selling this computer, my friend agreed to give me an additional $100 on top of the build cost for gathering and assembling the components. So, when everything is said and done, I'll have made over $1,200 in profit and will end up with $1,322 at the end of this challenge. I had a lot of fun stringing together these flips, especially early on in the challenge when I had to be patient, finding good deals, and stretching a smaller amount of money further. I'd definitely be interested in restarting the series, maybe with a new end goal, like aiming for a certain profit or final build, to make it even more interesting. If you have any suggestions, questions, or PC flipping experiences to share, feel free to leave a comment. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel to stay up to date with what I'm working on. And as always, thanks for watching.